Welcome back to the Doctor Nadia Podcast. I'm Doctor Nadia Podcast. I'm a naturopathic doctor, author, and metabolic health educator. And today I want to talk to you about something I say a lot. I bring something to the table, but I'm not the table. And actually, there's another part of that sentence that I think is just as important. You bring something to the table too. So today I want to talk about what I bring, what your healthcare team brings, and what you bring, and why no one person should ever claim to be the whole table. One of the biggest misconceptions I see is this. If a nutrition plan doesn't work, people assume the plan was wrong. I don't necessarily see it that way. I teach therapeutic eating because I believe it's one of the most effective tools we have for improving metabolic health. But a great plan is only one part of the equation. The other part is whether your biology actually allows you to follow it. And that distinction is really important. You can understand everything that I'm teaching you. You can know how to sit, pause, eat, stop. You can even understand meal, gap, meal. You can know when to eat, what to eat, and why you're doing it. But what if you physically cannot stop yourself from reaching for food? What if the cravings are overwhelming? What if the hunger feels impossible? What if the food noise just never switches off? That doesn't automatically mean you're undisciplined. It doesn't mean the plan failed, and it definitely doesn't mean you need another diet. It might mean you need another tool. And that's exactly why I spent an entire episode talking about building your healthcare team, because different people need different levels and different kind of support. Some people can hear what I teach, implement it tomorrow, and it changes their lives forever. Other people understand every single word, but they simply cannot execute it because there's something else going on biologically. That's not a character flaw. That's information for us. It's a clue. It tells us there may be another piece of the puzzle that needs attention. Maybe it's significant insulin resistance. Maybe it's perimenopause or menopause. Maybe you're not sleeping. Maybe there's a medication affecting your appetite or metabolism. Maybe HRT needs to be a part of the conversation. Maybe it's a GLP-1. Maybe it's something completely different that another member of your healthcare team is better equipped to identify and treat. The goal isn't to replace therapeutic eating. The goal is to make therapeutic eating possible. And I know this personally. This exact way of eating worked beautifully for me for years. And then my body changed. Perimenopause and menopause changed the equation for me. My cravings changed. My hunger changed. And I didn't just suddenly forget everything I knew. I didn't just lose all my discipline and all my willpower. Therapeutic eating didn't suddenly become useless. My body changed. And eventually, adding HRT and a GLP-1 gave me the support I needed to follow the very same principles all over again. The plan didn't change, but my ability to follow it did. And this is where I want to come back to the idea of the table, because I talk a lot about what I bring to the table. I bring more than 20 years of clinical experience. I bring my experience working with women with PCOS, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, and menopause. I bring years of teaching fasting and therapeutic eating. I bring what I've learned professionally, and I also bring what I've lived personally. But when I say I bring what I've lived personally, I mean much more than my own health history. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter. I've had PCOS, and I've gone through perimenopause and menopause. So when I talk about hormones changing your body or suddenly feeling like the things that used to work don't work in quite the same way anymore, I'm not only talking about something I've studied, I've lived some of it as well. I've also written a book about PCOS, the PCOS plan, and I'm now writing another book, the menopause plan. And writing forces you to do something interesting. You have to take everything you know, everything the research says, everything you've seen clinically, and somehow turn it into something another person can actually understand and use. And I think that's a big part of what I bring to the table. I'm also neurodivergent, and that absolutely affects the way I learn and the way I teach. I need things to make sense. I like systems, I like patterns, I like plans and lists and diagrams. I want to take everything that feels complicated and break it down until I can see how all the pieces fit together. That's probably why so much of what I teach eventually turns into something like meal, gap, meal, or a food pyramid, or food order, or a diagram, or 5 steps instead of 50. I'm constantly asking, how do I make this make sense? But there's another part of me that probably influences my work just as much. I've lived in 4 countries on 4 different continents. And everywhere I've lived, I've absorbed something from the culture, especially about food. I'm fascinated by the way people eat. I'm fascinated by traditions. I'm fascinated by what grandmothers knew long before we had randomized controlled trials to explain why some of those practices might actually make sense. I listened to my grandmother a lot. I'm a lover of history and anthropology. So I'm always asking questions like, how did people eat before we had food available 24 hours a day? How many times a day did they eat? Did they snack? Did families sit down together? What did a meal actually look like? How did people move? How do they sleep? How do they interact with one another? What happened around the food, not just what was in the food? Because metabolic health doesn't happen in a laboratory. It happens in real life. It happens in families, in kitchens, in workplaces, in restaurants, and cultures. And I don't believe that improving metabolic health requires everyone in the world to suddenly eat the same foods. Quite the opposite. I think there's enormous wisdom in looking at what humans have done across different cultures and throughout history, and then combining that with what modern science is teaching us about metabolism. So when I say this is what I bring to the table, I'm not saying I bring one qualification or one way of looking at health. I bring the clinician, the author, the researcher. I bring the teacher who needs to turn complicated information into a system that makes sense. I bring the woman who has lived with PCOS and gone through menopause. I bring the mother, the wife, and the daughter. I bring the neurodivergent brain that is constantly looking for patterns. And I bring all the places I've lived, the cultures I've learned from, and the history and anthropology that make me curious about how human beings lived before somebody handed us a set of dietary guidelines. That's my seat at the table, but it's still only one seat. And that's the point, because I'm not the table. Your doctor brings something too. Your therapist brings something. Your dietitian, pharmacist, physiotherapist, or another practitioner may bring something else. And most importantly, you bring something to the table. You bring your symptoms, you bring your history, you bring the experience of actually living inside your body every single day. You know what you've tried, you know what worked, you know what didn't work. You know, and only you know, what you can realistically sustain and what you cannot. And that information matters. Healthcare shouldn't be something that is simply done to you. You should have a seat at your own table. My job isn't to tell you that I have every answer. My job is to listen to what you bring, contribute what I know, help you understand what your body may be telling us, and recognize when somebody else needs to be brought into the conversation. Because good healthcare is rarely one person having all the answers. It's the right people bringing the right things to the table at the right time. So yes, I bring something to the table, but I'm not the table. And if someone tells you that they are, that's a big red flag.